We have been duped by feminism, sexual liberation, and antidepressants. We have been told that we are powerful and free now as women, but we feel tired, wired, and bitter. We're mostly eating right, exercising and meditating, wrangling to do lists, and arranging playdates. And yet there's a haunting hollowness beneath the huge complaints. What if I told you that there is a huge storehouse, a reservoir of energy inside of you that has not been tapped, that you could feel light and pulsing, excited and alive in ways that a wellness lifestyle cannot deliver, that you could trust yourself, that the world could feel safe, and that unexpected and expected delights could start to illuminate your path. No coach, therapist, doctor, or guru required. Just you learning to get real, present, and attentive with you. I feel like I'm here to matchmake your inner parts for the greatest love affair ever written. I want to help you learn first where you're buying eggs from the hardware store, which is the source of all pain. I want to help you master entering through the upset, which is the only spiritual practice you'll ever need, and to get real comfortable putting on your villain crown, which is, in my opinion, the key to true power. And then you'll attune to your inner yes so you can live the life defined by the specific pleasure of who you are. I am so excited to announce my latest book called The Reclaimed Woman, which is available for pre order now. So if you head to the link in show notes, you can learn more about bonuses, events, and companion offerings. And I cannot wait to see your gorgeous face on the path. I'm Dr. Kelly Brogan. You may know me as a New York Times bestselling author of a book with an exploding pill on the cover, renegade psychiatrist, pole dancer, or honorary member of the Disinformation Dozen. What can I say? I'm a born provocateur. I've spent most of my recent life exposing deceptions, connecting dots, and discovering the secret places my inner victim is still waiting to be liberated. And now I feel called to help you reclaim all of your parts, your health, your sexuality, your power, and your expression, so that you can finally truly own yourself. I want to ignite in you that inner knowing and the pulsing vitality that lives beneath your disempowerment, disconnection, and resentment, so that you can audaciously, courageously, and playfully alchemize your struggle into the specific pleasure of who you are. This is Reclamation Radio, a Soulfire production. Hi, and welcome back to Reclamation Radio. I am Dr. Kelly Brogan, and I am here with the one, the only, the man, the legend, Aubrey Marcus. And the tables have turned, motherfucker. So now you're in the hot seat. And we have had some really, really enlivening conversations on your program. And I want to really almost like pass the baton to myself in a way to continue the conversation, but through your lens. I mean, there's so many things clearly that I could talk to you about, and it's really an honor to have this time with you. And you have played a very significant role in my process of ending the war with men, I call it, and recognizing the fear at the root of my activism and really committing to resolving patterns of resentment and bitterness and disappointment that I have experienced throughout my entire life with men. And so I think that you are really a perfect ambassador for, for the male gender. And I want to really talk to you about what it's like in the modern moment. We're just talking a bit about the modern moment before we went live. So what it's like in the modern moment to be a man. And I want to zoom in first on roles. Right. I know that you also see life in terms of archetypes, and I would like to hear a little bit about what you perceive to be, let's talk about your role, but perhaps just a man's role in general, the idealized man with regard to his woman with regard to his community
Mhm.
and with regard to other men, because it's probably not the same, I would imagine, in all of those different avenues. So I would like to start there and just really dive in on this juicy
Yeah,
topic.
well, that's a broad spectrum of things to cover. So I think the first thing to highlight is that to be in the fullness of your masculinity and as a man, you have to be in touch with your feminine and you have to keep those roles in balance. And those who know me like really well in the deep understand that I have a highly developed queen as well as a highly developed king and a highly developed lover as well as a highly developed warrior and a highly developed magician as well as a highly developed mystic. And there's differences between these kind of archetypes, and I like working with these archetypes. But the first, I think, that's important that I don't think a lot of people get is the idea everybody conflates king and queen by the gender, the biological gender of the person. But actually, they're different archetypes fundamentally. And the king is in the Hebrew lineage is Tiferet. It's the masculine principle, and it's the principle that drives forward. It's the principle that makes decisions and can execute from a place of deep, deep stability. Like when everything is falling around and crumbling, like everybody looks to the king, and the king then at that point rallies in the historical metaphor rallies and says, "Rally to me, all those in fear, all those are weak, rally to me." And then the king charges forward. You think of, Lord of the Rings and Aragorn and the King of Gondor, it's like rally to me and we'll charge forward. And that's this kind of king energy, but that's also available to a biological woman. That doesn't mean that she's in her queen. She could be in her ruling king or her warrior king archetype, but it's not necessarily the queen. The queen is, while the king is charging, let me make sure that the king is supported in every way, that his eros is full and that his fuck has been fully activated and freed. And let me take care of the rest of the kingdom, those who can't fight and those who need shelter and support. And all of them rally to the queen. So the queen stays behind and stay with me, children, stay with me, those who cannot fight. And I'll be there for you to support you, to nurture you and all of that. And there's both of those roles need to be activated to actually be a good king or to be a good queen, and to understand that there's a masculine principle of a queen, which is actually the king within the feminine, or a feminine principle within the masculine, which is the queen. And those royal archetypes are just the highest fruition of that certain principle of leadership that kind of comes across. So that's one element that I think people that can help them with a kind of map that I think is important, because all the time people talk about, like, I want to be a queen, I want to be a king. Well, they're different actually, and it doesn't depend on your biology. They're just archetypes that you can really develop. So, that's kind of one principle that I like to work with and kind of talk about.
I love this clarification because in my 10 years of private practice, probably it was like halfway through, that decade, that I began to see that the energy that I was holding, as, you and I talk a lot about like Dom sub dynamics and these polarities. So as the leader, right, as the clinician, as the MD, as the one in the seat behind the desk, I sometimes joke that's why I became a psychiatrist, so that it'd be harder to find out that I'm crazy because I'm behind the desk. But anyway, that I was playing a father role, like that
Yeah,
I actually, and I wasn't just this like strong mother guiding, these women with this nurturance. It was actually the father archetype that I
yeah,
held those 10 years. And it was always very confusing to me. And this is such a helpful clarification because the simultaneous development of those two inner archetypes, it sounds like you're saying in a balanced way that you can recruit in a given scenario at will, right?
yeah. And it's you have to listen to the situation. So both are in service to a higher recognition of the field, capital F field. And so the field could be on the lower level of just kind of listening to the emotional energy, but it could also be in service to the higher field, which you would call God or the universe or source or the mystery, whatever name you want. But there's a deep listening that happens on both sides. The listening for when to thrust forward and when to receive, and both of those are very important. Now, for me, I spend most of my time in the king archetype. That's what the kingdom is asking from me. And especially lately, it's like really show up as that kind of, you know, as no matter the chaos, you can count on me. Like you can count on me in the stability and in the leadership and whatever I can do. So it doesn't mean that you have to spend an equal amount of time in each polarity. It just means that both, really to be in your fullness have to be really developed in a powerful way. And then from there, you have to understand like what you'll end up attracting in a partnership is ideally someone who likes to spend and thrives in spending the majority of their time in the other archetype. But if they don't have at least a bit of your archetype and they don't really understand, then you won't really understand each other and you won't really get each other and you won't be able to cover for each other when you need to. There's certain times where I can't do it. Let's say we're having a group that's coming together, at the house, and like I just can't show up and I can't be, Vi has to show up and be the king and lead people through whatever they need to be led through and kind of hold the center of it, and then I'll emerge when I have the time. So there's places that she can step up and be the king, and there's places where I can step up and be the queen and just be there for her, and then like nurture and support her. Like when she's doing a big performance, I'm like fully in my queen role. It's like whatever you need. You need water. You need me to just rub your shoulders. You need to be there. So I'll step into that. So it's important to have both, but also Vailana is more comfortable when she's just allowed to be her queen, allowed to just flow and be in the natural flow of things. So if it's 80-20 one way or the other, which probably it is, then I've found someone who also enjoys being 80-20 in the queen. And when it gets difficult and we have challenges in the relationship, it's when, you know, I'm in my king and she's in her king, and then where nobody's being the queen to anybody, and then there's not enough nurturing that's happening in the relationship, and it's actually we don't have the polarity. So actually our eros drops, a lot of things drop, and of course the sexual models the erotic, right? But it does not exhaust the erotic. That's what Mark Gaffney is part of, like a core tenet of his dharma. So in the bedroom, we actually get to exaggerate our polarities often. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're just rolling around in a kind of very fluid, more 50-50 type of situation. But oftentimes we'll exaggerate it to, 99 and 1%, where I'm like strongly in my masculine dominance and she's strongly in her feminine. And that charge that's created when you stretch the polarity out to its maximum is intense and actually recalibrates the comfort of us being in those different polarities. So it's a great, like, I can't imagine those relationships that don't have this strong sexual connection that can really play with polarity. It's very difficult, I think, to like recalibrate and actually balance and move the energy in anywhere that things are stuck.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's such a technology, right? And
Yeah.
not only for generating a field between the two of you that impacts your entire environment, but also, yeah, within your intrapersonal realm. How does this sort of archetype switching, if you will, manifest with your brothers, like with your men in your life? Do you see it as simply hierarchical? Is it an alpha beta type of thing? Or does the sort of king queen polarity sit with the community, with your woman, and there's an invocation of some other energies when you're interacting just with other men?
So I think the core for me of like the deepest friendships is I want to be, for someone to really feel like my peer, they have to have, a highly developed king. Like they have to have that element. And it's nice when they have some development as a queen, when they can just actually show up in radical support. And I think one of my brothers, I think of the two different Aarons, actually, who are, my brother kings, but Aaron Alexander has a very highly developed queen inside of him, right? He's there to, he'll do acro yoga for me or do some body work or just sit there and talk to me. And then other times he can step forward and we can be kings that are just like challenging each other. So we're always competing in everything. It could be like, there could be two paddle boards and we get on there and we'll wrestle on the paddle boards and try to throw each other off, or we'll play any type of sport or swords or whatever it might be that we'll compete in. We'll do like mock sparring, just where we'll go out and we'll spar against each other, and it's like this there's an element of competition that exists as a foundation, like foundational substrate that allows men to actually feel each other in a certain way. This is the, for men, I think competing is like fucking for a man and a woman. Like there's no way that I'm ever as intimate with a man as a friend if I don't find any way to compete with them. Now, the other way that you can do it is you can mutually go through hard stuff together. So it's like initiatory rituals, sweat lodges, medicine journeys, things like that. But finding a way to genuinely compete fosters like the greatest level of intimacy because you really get to know each other. And also you get to strengthen each other. There's a real iron sharpens iron principle where, man, not only do they compete, but will always be, in a loving way, like talking shit to each other. Like shit talking is probably like at least half of the communication that I do with my friends, and we're always doing that. If we find a sensitive spot, it's not that we avoid it. We just kind of lightly keep pressing, keep knowing that there's a place where like it'll go too far and then there'll be like real aggression, and knowing there's a place in competition that'll go too far. Like one of the rules I have about what you talk shit about and what you compete about is like, don't talk shit about actually being able to fight and beat each other up. Right. Like that's like such a sensitive area that like there's no way that you can, because you can't actually resolve it. There's no resolution to it. So if you start talking about who could actually win in a fight or who could like kill the other person, you never are able to resolve it. So there's this like tension. So there's certain things that are off the table, but everything else is like radically on the table. And that forms like the basis of masculine intimacy, and also this crucible that allows you to actually really feel each other and kind of trust each other in an interesting way, to be like, all right, what happens when you're pressed? What happens when you're tired? What happens at the end of that game when you're both exhausted and it's 16-16 in a game to 21 and it's your fifth game and it's hot and you both want to quit? Like, what does your brother have inside them? Like what emerges? Like how do you fight to the end, or is there a quit somewhere in them that you find? And it's okay if there is, but like I want to know that about my brothers. I want to know that I can trust them no matter what comes. So that's kind of the big difference that I see in the masculine to masculine relationship, is that healthy sacred competition allows for the intimacy that sexing allows in the masculine feminine relationship.
I think it's really profound because you're highlighting the relationship between aggression and trust, which I think does translate into arenas. You're really one of the only men that I've encountered who has like a healthy community of other men. Most of
Mm,
the men that I know, including most of my colleagues, we have allies, right? And the men in my collegial realm have allies as well who are other men. But to develop bonds and like real community, sort of tribe. I mean, certainly there are people doing it, but it's not common. And
mhm,
I think that I would say like reclamation of the dark masculine, that predatorial energy as displayed through these different means, it has to be an essential piece of what is missing and why men don't form relationships that are valuable to them with other men very readily. Because
mhm.
if you can't trust a man whose predator you haven't met, right? I mean, that's
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, imagine someone who, you know, displays lots of elements of the toxicity of a dark masculine, right? Like, let's say Donald Trump. Like, imagine me playing basketball or like competing in kendo with Donald Trump. And every time I hit him, being like, you're a little too slow and a little too orange, bro. Like, what have you been doing? What the fuck you been doing? Like, can you imagine that? You can just feel how fragile he would be and how like he would be unable to do that. You know what I mean? Like because he doesn't have any brothers that can really test him and actually allow there to be that kind of healthy level of competition that actually makes him not fragile but trustable. And I think that's what you see that's different, when people who can really actually, but at the same time, like I could imagine doing any variety of sports with RFK, who's super fucking fit. And I could imagine, being out there playing whatever sport it was or whatever thing, and being like, you're pretty strong for an old man, but you're a little too old for me. You're past your prime, Bobby. And I could see him laughing. I could see him laughing and being like, and then getting the ball back and being like, well, I'm still stronger than you think. I've been in this game for a while, young buck, and then like I could see the joy of that experience. And it's one of the reasons why I feel like a deep trust with him. Like I feel like he's the type of person that could enter that arena and I could really like trust them. And so it's kind of really like a guide star for me about where the relationships naturally develop, and when I'm around even those brothers that aren't at the level of like my, other fellow like brother king and peers, there's always some level in which we find it, and it can be in any variety of different things. But with Charles Eisenstein, we have pull-up contests, and we'll do that and we'll play pickleball. But then also when you're really better than somebody, it doesn't make sense to like talk shit, but it's to radically celebrate them. So when we're playing pickleball, we're actually pretty close in pull-up. So we'll talk shit full out because there's enough closeness. But when we're playing pickleball, he hits a good shot. And I'm like, good fucking shot, Charles. Like, good fucking shot. And like you got to like really, there's different places for that. Like if you're close and it's like, then you want to really challenge them and push them. And if it's not, you want to just celebrate them and bring them up and not like bully them and so that they don't want to play you. You want to like encourage them to continue the game and continue the effort. So, this is a foundational piece of, I think, the brother codes and for me. And then also, again, these ceremonial moments, these moments where the times are hard and times are difficult, to trust that they'll be able to show up and be there for you no matter what. And that goes for both, the men and the women in my life. Like everybody who's on, I have a necklace that signifies all the closest members of my ohana. And we've been in countless ceremonies together. We've seen each other at our most broken, and we've seen each other at our highest and most celebrated moments. And another key element for both of those, regardless of men and women, like you have to surround yourself with people who are radically excited and enthusiastic for your success, that are like never jealous, but always pumped to watch you shine. So when I go watch Aaron Rodgers play football, I remember a game where he played the Dallas Cowboys last year when he was playing for the Packers, and amazing fourth quarter comeback down 28-14, and they win in overtime. And I was just shaking and crying with joy. I was so happy for him. And I remember that with my friend TJ Dillashaw when he won the title, and Cody No Love when he won the title, and all the great athletes, Bodie Miller when he won the gold. It's like there's no way that my joy was any less than their joy. And I was like, I remember just tears like flowing and screams of like just such radical celebration of them and their mastery. So the competition gets expressed in healthy ways, but it doesn't get expressed in the toxic ways, which is comparison. And so like one of the guiding statements that I have is, competition is sacred, comparison is profane. Because if you don't get out that healthy competition, then you end up in a comparative competition, which is comparing your wealth or comparing your followers or comparing your fame or comparing whatever else it might be that you're comparing. But when you actually get to compete, then all of that dies away, and then you can just celebrate your brother or your sister's greatness.
So absent comparison, like you're talking about compersion, right? Like just like genuinely feeling somebody else's
Mhm.
pleasure. But absent comparison, where does hierarchy fit in? Like Jordan Peterson talks a lot about like the balance of competence and reciprocity. And that seems to be what you're speaking to, that there is an assessment of each man's competence. And there's also the mandate and imperative for reciprocity, that you got to get each other's backs and be there genuinely for each other and serve each other. Do you feel like the hierarchical organization is something to acknowledge and, even intentionally interact with? Or do you think that, it can be
Yeah.
problematic?
So within an organization, like when I was building on it, hierarchy needs to be actually established and codified. Everybody needs to know where the hierarchy is. And it also needs to be, you run into big problems when there's somebody who's more competent underneath somebody who's less competent. And that will create resentment and toxicity within the organization. So it has to be a meritocracy of competency that creates the hierarchy, but the hierarchy is established and it has to be followed. It's the only way to organize actually, a structure. And I think that's one of the things that's happened is that hierarchy is ultimately the structure of what I would call empire, which is the kind of the toxicity of what we see now with a certain small number of elites trying to rule and control everybody underneath them. Obviously, they're not doing it in a noble way. Their leadership is not emergent from the field. They're hiding their hierarchy and pretending that they're doing things on people's behalf, but they're really not. But so we've gotten kind of allergic to hierarchy because of the tyrants and the despots and these kind of natural aspects of empire. But hierarchy is important for structure, for government, for companies. And the kingdom also has hierarchy. And the kingdom being the opposite, the story of the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, the emergent future that we're heading towards also has to have hierarchy. But in areas of friendship, there's really a natural hierarchy that occurs that doesn't need to be spoken. Like it just doesn't need to be spoken. It's just emergent from the field. And when nobody has any ego about it, then actually it just happens naturally. So let's say we're going out to eat and I'm there and Aaron Rodgers is there. Well, I'm a better food orderer. I just have a more I have a better read of people's desires and appetites when it concerns food. And so I get the menu. Nobody argues with me. I order the food for the table. And I'll listen. Anybody have anything that really piques your interest here or whatever? So I'll receive that information, collect that information, and then make an executive decision so we don't have to all cross over. 5 people order the same appetizer, we have too much, like doesn't make any fucking sense. So there's a need for somebody to take the role of collecting the data and making the executive decision. Aaron is a better sommelier than me. He understands wine better than I do. So the wine menu goes to him, like, Aaron, find us a wine, I'll find us our food. And it's not that we have to, talk about it. We just know actually he knows wine better than me and can read what that's going to be. I know food better. So it's a very small example. Same with like travel arrangements or something like that. Like I'm very good at reading because I think of my developed queen. I can really read people's, appetites and what would be fun and see into those situations. And it's part of the vision of the king as well, but it's both. And so I'll be involved in most of the planning of those certain situations. And whether it's Makad or Aaron or whoever, they'll all kind of like bow and like, Ob's got this. And they get to just relax and then be the jester or be whatever they want to be while this is happening. But it just kind of happens naturally based on, the realization of competency and also the feeling that I don't have to be the best. I don't have to be the one that's ordering because that makes me special or whatever. And I don't have to, I just, the best will naturally happen. And we're all in this together. And so we all want to have the best dinner possible. We all want to lead the best, most effective, powerful lives possible. So there's no need to jockey for these small games. It's like when you realize you're all playing a bigger game together, and as Gaffney would once again say, you're wholemates, which is you're looking at a shared horizon together of what the shared intention is, then the natural competency hierarchy will emerge. It'll be emergent from the field and it will flow. And there's times also where, I remember one time with my friend Jason Strauss, who's like one of the, heads. He was one of the heads of Tao Group and then MGM, and he's a restaurateur, and we were in his restaurant. And he was like, what would you like to eat? And I was like, my brother, I'd like you to take care of this. And I hadn't eaten with him, but I could just feel like he would know how to handle it, like hospitality and VIP and his awareness of the restaurant. So like gladly, like you take over. And it's a great joy for me to relinquish that actually in competent hands. Whereas other times when I've been around people like, I'll take the ordering, I'm like, it's just not going to be as good. But you know what? Like, I'll let you handle it, but there's a way in which I'm like, all right, but you can try, you know what I mean? And I just have a sense of that. Yeah, it's cool to actually talk and make verbal these things that just exist kind of naturally. And because I think these are the dynamics that would go really unnoticed unless you actually had a conversation like this and talked about it. And then, of course, if you were, or anybody listening was actually with me and my friends at dinner, you would see how this goes, and then there's the healthy levels of competition, which is we all try to figure out how we can, in the most secret way, give our credit card to the server so that we get to be the one, we have the honor of paying for it, and it's like this quiet little competition. And the secret is that you do it in a way where nobody knows that you've already done it, and then you try to give your card and they're like, I'm sorry, sir, but so and so's already taken care
We've
of it. It's like,
lost.
yeah, you lost. You're
Yeah.
like, motherfucker, thank you. But then it's like, you got us, but also like, thank you. And that's kind of the way that it rolls. But you would now, having listened to me, if you were there at dinner, which I'm sure you will be at many dinners that we'll have just as friends, you'll be able to look at it and be like, oh yeah, this is what Aubrey was talking about.
I love it. So there is comparison, or what I would register as comparison. It's an assessment, but it sounds like it's like a sober, unspoken assessment that is devoid of judgment and replete with respect. Like that's what I'm hearing. It's like
Yeah.
there is just a field of mutual respect that you bring to these interactions with other men that allows for what would otherwise be called, I don't know, like a comparative evaluation, right? So I'm better than him. He's better than me. He has more, but it's not in that sort of scarcity consciousness. It's
Yeah,
in
it's
this
it's a natural
sober realm.
acknowledgement of, yeah, it's right. It's
Yeah.
a natural acknowledgement of the highest competency in that area, in that
With
field.
respect for everyone's role, right? Like
Exactly.
understanding that
Exactly.
everybody has this role. So
Mm.
something goes really wrong early in a boy's life with regard to these dynamics, especially if that boy is like not encouraged to play team sport, I would
Yep.
imagine. I've been thinking a lot about recently because that I'm very interested in, the psyop that's been run on women as far as, feminism goes. And so I've interested myself in how challenging it is for men in the modern moment. But then I also think about how boys are raised in most of, in conventional schooling, let's say they're raised in a classroom, and that the classroom environment with a teacher in the front, like typically a woman, right, in the front, talking at a child who is compliant, obedient, waiting to be told when they can pee and poop and eat. So
Mhm.
basically, in this hyper submissive role, really, even you could invoke, I just finished a book on Marquis de Sade, but there's like a lot of unspoken sadism in
It
these
goes hard.
dynamics,
Yeah.
right? And that is like, seems way more costly for boys than it is for girls. Like that seems very, very problematic for a boy's body, for his development and relationship to his own, animating life force energy, to be sitting in a chair being talked at by a woman for the greater part of his childhood. So, like, when I think about some of these early childhood issues that we are resolving, let's say, if I can speak on behalf of women, this fundamental fear of men that so many of us are walking around with semi consciously that lead us to henpeck men and micromanage them and disrespect them and, diminish them and then experience a life of resentment and disappointment. I wonder if you have a perspective on like what are some of the enduring imprints from early boyhood
Mm.
that like you and the men that you hang around are still working on, are still burning off. Because it's like,
Yeah, I've never really thought about that in that way, because to me, it didn't matter if it was a man or a woman who was a teacher. If the teacher was teaching something that I judged to be inane or pointless, and then I was forced to actually comply with listening and learning and understanding this thing, but there was no genuine explanation of why this was fucking important to me, then there was this huge rebellious streak that came in me, that was like, fuck this. Like, I don't care, like, and so you just suffer through it. And, it teaches you that sometimes you have to endure things that you're not going to like. And that's part of, I think, what Bertrand Russell said is like the highest virtue of schooling is to teach you to do the things that you don't want to do. And so there is something like, but that needs to be explained, I think. Actually, like what you're learning now is to do something that you don't want to do and to actually apply yourself to something that you're not interested in. And this is actually going to be something that you will find yourself having to do at some point. At some point, you're going to be out of your parents' house and you're going to have to figure out how to do your fucking taxes. And I remember for the first few years before I could hire a proper accounting team when I was running my marketing company, just sitting for hours doing over the QuickBooks, balancing the books, figuring out why the numbers weren't met. I was like, I hate this so much, but I did it. I was able to do it. And then, by the time I was able to choose my classes in college for the most part, I just chose stuff that I was super interested in. So, I was philosophy and classical civilizations major. I loved my Latin teacher, so I kept taking Latin and got a minor in Latin. And I was in theater and just doing all of the things that I really loved to do. So there was a natural joy of participating in those classes and in that work, and I would actually go above and beyond what was actually required. Like I remember I was in this English literature class where we were studying some old, Chaucer, and we were studying, Troilus and Cressida. And there was some kind of writing assignment for us to write some poem, in kind of the theme of Middle English romance. And I ended up writing, a 20-page rhyming couplet, poem of an alternate ending of Troilus and Cressida, right? Which is kind of a Romeo and Juliet type story with a more warrior in battle. It's like Romeo and Juliet meets Troy, basically. And so it was like, I did that out of love, like that was way more than that anybody would have asked. But I did that because I was passionate for it. And so even when my friends were going out, drinking, or there was this beer pong match down the hall, or there was this party going on at this dorm or whatever, I'd be like, no, 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 I want to do this. And then there was certain things that I wasn't interested in. I was a philosophy major, and this very like precise study of epistemology, how you know what you know, I didn't resonate with that class at all. So, I had to do a thesis about that, and I waited to the last minute and I put some shit together and I got a C, which is a super unusual. I was magna cum laude at Richmond. I was always doing well, but it was because it was like, man, this fucking class does not resonate. I know because I know, you know what I mean? Like I actually had an intuitive sense of my own, what I would call anthro-ontology, through my body, I envision God. I understand the truth because I understand the truth. I don't need to explain to you, all of the intricate details of epistemology. So it was probably the worst grade I got in my entire major. And, I remember my professor looking at me like, you didn't even try. I was like, yeah, I don't like this. You know what I mean? There was an honesty to it. So I wouldn't say I had a lot of issues that kind of was brought forth through that, because I was able to assess, all right, there's certain things that I have to do that I don't want to do. And I know that I'm doing that. And there's certain things that I love. And, I'm going to do those with full passion and full desire. Where actually I had a lot that I had to work through was with my basketball coach. Because my basketball coach didn't operate the team based upon a meritocracy. He didn't actually play me to the level that I was capable. I was one of the leading scorers in Central Texas. I had the highest, one of the highest 3-point shooting percentages. I was voted team captain, multiple years, and he still would never play me more than 2.5 quarters. And it wasn't because I wasn't fit; it's because he didn't like me. I was always I moved from California to Texas, and I was the California boy. Like, hey, California. I was like, I don't know what you're looking for me, coach, but like I'm your best fucking player out here, on the offensive side of the ball at the very least. And, I'll give everything for this team. And because he wouldn't actually acknowledge that, I had this kind of deep feeling that the masculine in charge wasn't going to be fair, and that lack of like sense of fairness and sense of like, he had so much ego, and he would do crazy things. Like the night before a game, we would practice and he would get all nervous and or whatever was going on psychologically, and then keep us, an hour after practice running suicide sprints. And then the next day we'd come out flat and be like, coach, you're a fucking idiot. Like, of course we don't have any legs right now. Of course they're, running the fast break and they're beating us because you ran us all night last night. So there's areas of that because I really cared about basketball and I really cared about the team that was difficult, and I had dreams. I had dreams about that coach for probably 10 years after I finished
Mhm.
playing. It'd show up. So there's things that we carry, but to me, it was more about, you know, whether the situation was fair. And in fairness to a lot of teachers, I think they're teaching things that they don't love. And the teachers that I really liked, they were teaching things that they believed in. The reason why I kept studying Latin is because the teachers who are teaching Latin, they're teaching Latin because they love it and they believed in it and they believed in the stories. And like my professor, Walt Stevenson, I still talk to him to this day because I love and I still tell the stories he told because he told them with such passion. He would tell the stories of the Roman legions and how they would separate the different classes of soldiers. And he would just get so into it and you'd get this picture painted and I would just be riveted, so I wouldn't skip any of his classes. So schooling can be a really beautiful thing. It's just when a structure is in place that isn't fair, or there's an individual that creates something that's not fair in the field, that becomes very difficult for me to metabolize.
I mean, many would say, I tend towards the conspiracy realist. So many would say that the entire, Rockefeller funded educational system is actually designed to disconnect a child from his or her spirit and their eros, their
Yep.
sense of trust and alignment with the impulses that course through them,
Right.
right? So you talk about having really, it seems like retained a relationship to your own eros, to your own impulse, to this trust of your own passions. And I don't know that everyone can say the same, after 12 years of public schooling or whatever it is. I'm going to pause here for a quick second. If you are into the topic of man woman relating, polarity, and what the reclamation of Eros has to do with holistic health, then I invite you to check out and download my free ebook on the subject at the link below, and to also check out a blog I wrote that goes deeper into the subject of BDSM, some of the science supporting it, and why these reframes and tools may be exactly what the world needs to move out of confusion, resentment, and victimhood and into personal empowerment and pleasure. Hope that helps. So, I wonder, obviously, you are a man on mission. I wonder what you say to men who, perhaps even by virtue of having been products of the system, are lost when it comes to their passion, their interest, their purpose. What are the breadcrumbs you could sprinkle, that bring them back home to a dynamic relationship with, I mean, I would call that your inner feminine, right? Like a relationship that is trusting and loving to what it is that animates you, shows you in many ways, like what you're here to do. And then all the competencies that you bring make manifest from that place. But what happens, when somebody just doesn't know, do you encounter men like that who are just
I encounter men who
lost?
are who are you're frustrated because I was there. I was frustrated in that I knew that I had a greater gift to give to the world, but I couldn't find a way to give it in a way that it was received. It was like I had, again, to use the sexual to model the erotic, I had a raging cock and I was looking to fuck the world. And there was no feminine chalice that wanted, that was arousing the feminine waters enough, who was inviting me to fuck it open. I couldn't figure it out. And every time I would go, I would find a brick wall rather than a yearning yoni, to actually so I think that's going to be a part of the process where you're actually, you may have access to your fuck, which I did, but I just couldn't find a way that actually the goddess at large, Gaia Sophia, or the collective feminine of the world, was like actually eager to receive my fuck. I just couldn't line up where that was. And part of that is just, developing a greater attunement to listening to what the feminine at large is asking for from you, what your own gifts are, and just exploring, figuring it out, trying to understand, what works in the smallest level, like what inspires your friends, like what topics of conversation when you're talking about people are like, whoa, that's really interesting. And if you continue to do that and develop your own self mastery, then you're going to find places where there's that, again, proverbial yoni that's ready to receive, what the thrust of information, energy, et cetera, that you have to offer. And I found that only in sport, really, until I was about 30. And occasionally, like, my writing would really touch people, my poems, people would be like, whoa, that was, or my conversations, but it still wasn't working. And I got, really pretty depressed, actually. I thought I'd really fucked everything up. I was like, look, somewhere along this path, I went left when I should have gone right. And, I fucked it up. So, but I kept trying. I kept at it, and I kept trying a different thing, a different thing, a different thing, until finally I found something that really worked. I found allies that could help me. And I found the field that I could actually start to penetrate the world with. And I think that's the deepest masculine craving, is we want to penetrate the world. That's Tiferet. That's the masculine principle. So it's just, there's going to be a period where, you're still a young man and you don't know how to, fuck the mature woman of the collective. And so you just have to keep becoming a better lover, someone who's going to actually listen and read and then apply your fuck in a way that it's received. And that's a process. So my advice to the younger men is, like, stick with it, keep honing your mastery, get to the point where you have something that the world is really craving from you.
The yearning yoni of the world.
Hmm.
Such a good alliterative phrase. And what would you say advice wise to like new parents of a boy? Right? Like I have two daughters. I have no ground to stand on, with any degree of confidence when it comes to advising people who have sons. And I know that this is one of the most important undertakings, available in the current moment,
Hmm.
is to raise sons properly and to resolve a lot of the enculturated fear, that women have of men and therefore their own sons, that might lead them to, energetically, spiritually, emotionally castrate them. So that,
Hmm.
you talk about a man who's in touch with his fuck, but there are so many who literally have coupled that with so much danger that they don't have contact with it, right?
Hmm.
That's probably two sides of the same coin, this like reckless wielding of that energy and this sort of total disconnection from it. But I wonder, if you have friends who, have, let's say, a little boy they're raising,
Right.
what is it that you would imagine is essential for them to bear in mind, just given the trials and tribulations that, or maybe they're all necessary, but that could be avoided,
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
boy
Yeah. For
growing
sure.
into manhood.
I think with so first of all, with my father, it's really, what I see a lot of times with fathers with children is somehow the child is disconnected from connecting with the eros of the father, right? And for whatever reason, that was the opposite of my experience. When my dad was, like, really, one of the reasons why I love sports so much is my dad loved sports. Like, he loved competing. And when he would play basketball with his friends, I would be out there watching him play. And I had a little side goal on the side and I'd be shooting around, but I was too little to play. But I would see how passionately he was playing and how intense he was. And I loved it. And I just loved watching him, and I loved watching him compete. And he modeled for me the eros of competition. And so I then stepped into the eros of competition, and I would compete with my dad. Eventually, I got good enough to play in the 3-on-3 basketball in the backyard, and I got good enough to play tennis with him, and I got good enough to play chess with him and play Scrabble with him and do all of these things. And that was huge, because in those moments, I would have the radical presence and attention of my father, and I would also be able to engage in what he loved. And so he modeled something for me that was really important there. And then he also cared about what I was doing, in a way. Like, he, remember, like, my dad had really bad sciatica for about a year and a half and couldn't actually sit down in a seat. He had to, like, lay down. And this was when I was playing middle school basketball. And he cared so much about my basketball. It's middle school basketball. It's not a big deal. But he would have them, he would talk to the school and he would roll in, like, basically like a small mattress, like a fold up mattress. And he would lie in the side of the gym, lie down and watch me play in the gym. lying down on a mattress just to see me play. And it was like he fucking cared. And yeah, sometimes, he would like sometimes he would be a little more loving if I did good than if I didn't. But he didn't mean to. And so I had to deal with that, this idea that I'm only loved by the masculine if I'm performing my best. And he wasn't trying to do that, but he couldn't help himself. So there was a little bit of work that I had to do there, but I think I was just radically interested in conversations and also the things he was interested in. Also, my father always didn't treat me like a child. He treated me like a young adult. So if him and my stepmom, he got with my stepmom when I was 7, if they were talking about their friends who were having a relationship issue or having something, even as an 8-year-old, he would ask me, "What do you think? What do you think, Om?" I was Chris back then, but what do you think? And I'd be like, "Well, blah, blah, blah." And my dad would be like, "I like the way you're thinking about this, but have you thought about this?" And I'd be like, "No, I didn't think about that." And so he would work with me. And then eventually by like 11 or 10 or 11, like I was able to contribute and actually have insight that was valuable and he would recognize it. And so I became a part of the conversation. So I loved dinner time, this kind of model where, and I don't know what the difference was because with my little brother, I watched him and he would never get into it. We'd be having conversation. My dad would try to do the same thing and try, but he just wasn't into it. I think it was also part of the digital distraction era. He had a video game that he wanted to play or a Game Boy, and then they kind of pandered to that in a way. They were like, "All right, just eat your food and you can go back to playing your game." But it didn't yield the same kind of connective experience that I had where I like was eager to hear what the conversation was and eager to contribute. And I loved dinner time. I loved the moments where I got to talk. And then on the maternal side, I think one of the things that can be really damaging is that kind of devouring, overprotective mother. Like your kids they're gonna fall, they're gonna get hurt. You don't want those injuries to be death. Like you want to put some boundaries on things that are
Just
really
shy
gonna,
of it.
yeah, yeah, like anything that's gonna be like really potentially like a deadly decision, of course. Like keep those boundaries really firm, but everything else, like let your kids make mistakes, let your kids fall, let them get hurt, and like let them learn. And then when they do, don't be in there shaming them, just be trust that they're actually learning the lesson and that's a necessary part because otherwise then you can also start to build dishonesty. Like no matter what I was doing, no matter what drug I was trying or no matter what party I was doing, I didn't have to lie to my parents. I could always talk to them about it. And so there was no split between what I was actually sharing with my parents and how they were receiving it. And there was still boundaries on, if I would overstep something, throw a party that was too big or something when they were gone or was being reckless in some way, they'd be like, "Yo, come on." And I would be bummed. I'd be bummed that I disappointed them. And I would know like, yeah, I went too far. They wouldn't need to punish me. I remember I remember one time my parents, they were like, "You're grounded for the weekend." I'm like, "What?" Like,
What does that mean?
what are you even talking about? Like, do you not understand that I learned the lesson and I get it and I didn't want to disappoint you and I never want to disappoint you because I love you? I don't need any punishment. This is stupid. I argued with them relentlessly, but they decided they were going to give it a try. And so I remember and I was like, this is just bullshit. Like, you're not seeing me. You're not seeing that actually, like, I get it. And I learned that that was
The
too
natural consequences. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
and there didn't need to be an additional punishment on top of that. And yeah, I think that was kind of how I was raised. And it was really a beautiful way to be raised. That's literally the only time that I remember a punishment. And I also remember the grace of forgiveness, when like I remember I one time I wanted to drive my stepmom's car when she was out of town. And I was like, "Oh, she had a Mercedes." And I go to leave the garage and I'm like 18, it's a fast Mercedes. And I was like, "I'm gonna go drive this car." And I was like a little bit nervous. I knew it was a little bit naughty because I didn't ask. They probably would have let me do it if I asked, but I was like, I'm just gonna do it. And I'm leaving the car and I'm backing out, looking behind me. And then I sideswipe the side of the garage. I'm like, "Oh my God, you gotta be fucking kidding me." And in that moment, they could have just really hammered me, but they're like, "It's just a car. Like,
Mm.
it's just a car. Like, don't worry." Cause I was beating myself up so bad and they could see that. And it was like, "It's just a car. Don't worry." This is like one of the things that kids do, and it's okay, you know? And I was like, oh, but because of that, like I learned also the grace and forgiveness, and they didn't like over hammer a situation, which would teach me how to be. I was already hard enough on myself, you know, so I didn't need to learn more shame, you know, about a situation where clearly I was aware that I made a mistake. So, I mean, I was really blessed with how I was raised, to be honest. And so, if any of those stories can give guidelines, I think that's really important. And also, you know, look, sometimes your kids may get in a fight. You know, my father taught me martial arts from when I was and had me learn when I was like 4 years old. And but because I was in a disciplined practice, like he's like, there's going to be a time to fight, and then there's a time where you don't fight. And despite an extremely high level of competency in fighting, I only have gotten in one street fight in my whole life, you know, even in the schoolyards and everything. I mean, there were certain situations where I had to be physical, you know, but I was able to be physical and quell a situation in a way that didn't require actual fighting. And then, you know, one time there was just no choice. You know, the group of guys, one of them slammed my fiance at the time, her name was Caitlin, slammed her face into the side of my car, and there was four of them. And it was just a full fury of everything that I'd trained my whole life. And, you know, it was a rough fight, but, you know, we ended up on our feet and we were bloody, but, you know, they ended up running away, and we were okay, you know. And so of all of the years, you know, of training martial arts, there was only one instance where I had to use it thus far. But the feeling of confidence that I could
Right. Yeah,
changed
that's
changed
everything.
the very foundation of my nature. Like I'm not scared in those situations. And I've watched many times where there was an imminent conflict, and I've stepped forward and been like, if you want to do this, you know, like basically all my energy, whatever I said is like, if you want to do this, this is going to go bad. Like, this is going to go really bad for you. And then I've watched a lot of people like recognize that and like back away, especially people who have this kind of street awareness of someone's confidence. You know, like they recognized I was not prey. And maybe they were confident in their ability as a fighter, but they knew that this was no easy out, that, you know, they better pack a lunch because I wasn't going anywhere. And this was going to go down to the, I was willing to fight to the death, and I knew what I was doing. And so those situations have really prepared me to be competent in a variety of situations. And I'll feel in my body when there's a situation. So I guess this is kind of an encouragement for, you know, training your sons to be competent in martial arts. There's not a lot of times where you're going to actually have to fight, but there's countless times where my confidence and my ability to has actually adjusted what happened in the situation. So it's an encouragement to like get your sons in some kind of martial arts training so that they're confident and that they can be a protector. And I'll feel things kind of, even if I'm out drinking and I'm a little buzzed, if I feel the energy get a little sketchy or predatory, or I see people kind of circling our group, as I've been blessed to be around many beautiful women and for many years of my life, and I'll feel something happen. I'll feel a certain sobriety set in,
Mhm.
and I'll feel myself become hyper aware of my surroundings. And I put my drinks down, and I'm like, all right, we're in a situation that's just gotten a little bit tense. And so I'm ready and I'm vigilant. You know, that comes from, you know, competency, awareness, and just training myself to be able to handle a variety of situations and testing myself in as many ways as possible. That's another thing is when I was 18, my father sent me on a psychedelic vision quest initiation, 18, you know, and so that's a huge, huge initiatory practice. And continuing to do those initiations, like I know myself in the deep. I know what's going to happen if someone comes to fight me. I know that I'll come back and fight. I know myself in confronting a demon in the astral as well as a demon in the physical. Like I understand how to stand and how to fight and how to receive attack, both physical or on social media, you know, which certainly for those of us who've been standing in the last 4 years, you know, or even recently as I stand for RFK, like the arrows come. And, you know, you just have to be ready to be like, all right, like this is the nature of the game.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That is such valuable, it's really an extraordinary, like, compendium of the elements that have made you who you are. And I heard a lot in there about a relationship to failure, which I think is probably, not being a man, I imagine, is one of the most important masteries, is to develop, like even when you got in trouble with the car, oh my God, I could just feel, I think I did similar shit. Feel that moment of fuck.
It was the
But
worst. I actually tried to time travel in that moment. I literally thought, like, if I close my eyes and I with all my intent go back in time, this will be a dream and I'll wake up and this didn't happen. And I thought I almost got there. At one
your
point. I was
wizard
like,
archetype is coming
yeah, I
on.
was like, I'm going to time travel back and this is just a dream and it didn't happen. Of course, I was unsuccessful
So
in it.
good. But the way you were received, I mean, that is
But
an imprint around failure
yeah,
that
totally.
is invaluable, to be received in that way for your humanness and for your intention, right? When we can be seen for our intention, even when we fuck up, even when we fail as men or women, it makes all of the difference. So I love hearing that. Is my last question. You talked a little bit about your experience of attunement, like through your body vessel, right,
Mhm.
to your environment, and how so much of that inner awareness was cultivated, like from a very young age for you. And you know that I love David Data's teachings, and he talks about how a man's body, right? So you and I both celebrate the differences between men's bodies, women's bodies, right? And that a man's body actually is a completely different terrain than a
Mhm.
woman's body. And one of the challenges in dyadic, heterosexual dynamics is that we project and we conflate, right? And we can get into this egalitarian mindset of like, well, your body must feel like mine and my body must run, like yours. And he talks a lot about how a man's body often can have like no emotions at all, like nothing
Mhm.
happening in there. And I have done many, many, many family constellations, group family constellations, and I have not surprisingly been chosen as a father probably more than a dozen times, like
Mhm.
people's fathers, right? So I have played that part, and it's probably the closest that I've come to having any empathic bridge to how different a man's system might be, if this field has, validity. And I, I,
Mhm.
I happen to believe in it. And what I would feel in those experiences is like a cavernous, like an echoey, cavernous, open vessel inside of me that was not the same as the numbness that I'm pretty familiar with, and it
Mhm.
felt different. And so I thought to just ask you a bit about that. Like what is it like to be in a man's body? How do you imagine it's different than what it's like to be, your woman in her body? And particularly with regard to emotional energies, right? Like, do they just like fly on stage and, require immediate suppression? Or are they kind of just like rattling around in the background and you can pay attention or you don't have to? Like, what is it like on the daily to just be in a man's body?
Yeah, it's not as dissimilar as I think you might imagine, at least for me. Like I'm also, I'm a very watery being. I have a very highly developed feminine. So, I cry in a film probably more readily than any of my partners. Like the tears are always close. And I think that's an element to, my brothers that I also really appreciate is like, I want to know that the tears are close to the surface because that means you're really alive, you're really feeling. And that's, I think, one thing that gets reflected to me, probably more than anything else, is how often people have seen me in these vulnerabilities. I mean, my percentage of crying on podcasts is like absurd. It's got to be like 60% at least of every podcast. Like at some point, I'll reach tears because I really passionately feel, and that's part of I went by the moniker Warrior Poet, and Warrior Poet was like a guide star, So like I have on my ribs, that's hard to see, but it's a big samurai, and this represents my warrior. And then I have my flowers, my roses. So it's hard to see here, but roses, which represents like the deep feeling nature of who I am, and my grandmother on my other. So even what I wear on my body is in balance. It's the warrior here, and the grandmother, and the moon, and a necklace that my mother gave me. And so I'm trying to cultivate that balance. And within that balance, I think I can really feel similarly to how the feminine feels because I'm in touch with my feminine. I mean, we're all the body of the goddess. Whether you have a cock or whether you don't have a cock, you're still the goddess, you're still the mother, you're still made up of her parts, of her recycled wolf fur and shark teeth and hummingbird feathers and sweetgrass. And you're all a part of the same thing. So it can and should be a lot more similar than I think people realize. Now, we do have a cock. And this is where the problems for me really have had probably the most work to work through, is because I had a strong conflation and connection between my performance in bed with the, firmness of my cock. And if my cock let me down, then like I was no longer a man and my fuck was no longer able to meet the fuck of, the goddess. And I let the goddess down. And to me, like letting the goddess down, because I had such a beautiful relationship with my mom. I love the goddess. Like my relationship with my mother and my grandmother were unbelievable. And so my deep passion and love for the goddess, like I want to please her. And I learned from the masculine in unhealthy ways that, and I think culture says this, that the way you please the woman is with a hard cock and like the vigorous sexing that comes from, penetrative sex. And what I've really had to learn is to kind of separate my fuck from my cock. And unsurprisingly, when I've separated my fuck from my cock, then my cock and my fuck actually there's no dissonance between them. So it actually moves in accord. And that's been some of the great teachings from some of the great teachers like Layla Martin, and Liz Letchford and, Emily Fletcher and Mama Gina. They'll be trying to actually reconnect your essence to your cock by actually separating them first and understanding that this is your fuck and that's what's important, and that the woman can be ravaged by your fuck regardless of what's happening. And so that's been like a real journey for me. And I feel like really blessed that I've made it through the other side of that journey. So I don't go into any sexing with trepidation, like, don't betray me now, buddy. Like, like we gotta be. And there was this kind of like issues be like, no, I'm gonna ravage you no matter what. Like whatever happens, like you're gonna feel the fullness of my fuck, regardless of the situation. And you're gonna know that you're gonna feel the full feeling of being fucked open by me, regardless of whether we have penetration or not. And that's allowed me just the freedom to take all of the pressure and anxiety that's come with sexuality off the table, and really like allowed me to step into the next level of my sexing, and also my confidence as a man, because it's not related to my penis.
I just finished an interview for the podcast with River Roaring, who's a sex worker, former attorney. And we talked about, she calls it boner shame,
Yeah.
this agenda, that is socioculturally imposed on boys where their bodies are literally not allowed to animate naturally, right? And they have to stay within this like very structured disconnection.
Yeah.
This part of them, their cock cannot be moving in
Right.
inappropriate ways at any time in life, right? Like she talks about how like a woman can walk down the street, like feeling the breeze, like looking at a flower, her pussy dripping, and that's encouraged, right? It's like socially celebrated, especially in this moment. But a man's supposed to be, this kind of man all the time, or a boy. But when he gets into the bedroom, that's when the cock animates, and only
Right.
there,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like
Right. Right. Right.
that is very tall order, no pun intended. Like not fair. Right? Like, it's not
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
And
It's something
so
that
I
something that
am
needs
so
to
glad you're
be.
talking about it, because you can't be alone in encountering
No,
this.
definitely not. And surprisingly, whenever I shared these discussions, like overwhelmingly men are like, yeah, like this is heavy. This way
Yeah.
is really heavy. I just, heard a story from a lover. And the story was that, her in a previous relationship, her man was like very, he basically had difficulty with his sexing. So he would come like really fast. He would like super premature ejaculation. And then his response was to shame her for her sexual desire, and then be like mean to her and distant, and then start to gaslight and like respond in these really toxic ways, because he was he had so much internal shame that he would project it outwards. And then so she's had to like really come to terms and realize like, wow, that really fucked me up actually, and actually altered my connection to myself because of the way that, the way that this whole situation happened. And so there's the sympathy for her for what she had to deal with. And also the like, yeah, fuck that guy. But also, man, that poor guy, like
Mhm.
the poor guy, like what he was actually going through is deep and so intense. And he obviously didn't handle it in a good way, but men don't have anybody to talk to about that. Like that's also one of the areas that until you get real friendship with people that you can actually share that kind of thing with, they're not gonna like your brothers will be there to actually you actually have a place to talk to your brothers, to talk to whoever about it. Like you have to be able to open up and discuss whatever happened. I think of like someone like Kyle, my friend Kyle Kingsbury, and like no matter what it is, no matter what's going on, like we can always talk about it and laugh. Same with Aaron Alexander. Like no matter what it is, we can talk about it and laugh, and not laugh at each other, but laugh together. Just be like, yeah, I know, like this is. So I think just taking the shame that shrouds all of this in secrecy and keeps it in a black box and being able to open it up is the way that we heal through this stuff together.
I love it. I love it. And we've talked about how my teacher Omar Pandi says that men don't need help feeling their feelings. I think you have expressed that, right? Like your heart's here. It's here, it's open, it's ready, it's flowing. And that what is needed for a lot of men is help reclaiming their spine, right? Like help
Yeah.
with that discipline, with that healthy predatorial energy, with that competition. And you model that so extraordinarily. You are an inspiration to me. And I know to so many people in your community that you touch on like such a humble level. And I feel really, really blessed to walk this path with you. I'm so
Likewise, sis.
grateful that we got to chitty
Likewise,
chat
sis.
in this
For sure.
conversation. So I just want to, yeah, give you the mic one last time and for you to share like what you're lit up about and what you're working on, what you're putting your vital force energy
Well, the
toward.
thing I'm most excited about right now is we have our Arcadia Festival, and that's going to be at Area 15 in
You're not
Nevada.
allowed to talk about this. This is on the same weekend as my event.
Oh, never mind then.
Because
It's
I
not
invited my
November.
Lana. I invited your woman to my event in Miami, and that's when I learned about Arcadia. No, please share. It's a different audience.
Yeah. So if you're not going to Kelly's event, we have this like unbelievable musical lineup, unbelievable guests, and we're really just trying to anchor in what it feels like to live in the kingdom in the more beautiful world. And last year was just outrageous. And I'm just really excited. It's through Fit for Service, but it's a different container, different program. So yeah, anybody interested, fitforservice.com/Arcadia with a K. And yeah, so if you're not a Kelly's, then you want to go have some fun out
It
at
looks
Area
amazing,
15.
as always. I mean, everything you do is just top
We
shelf.
have fun.
So,
We have fun.
oh my God,
Sure.
yes, you do.
Love you.
So good. Thank you. And I will talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good.